Chapter-2, Life Divine and the Supreme Self. With intense love and heartfelt devotion, the devotee pleases God. And when he is blessed by God's vision and grace, he feels ever happy in the Lord's presence. The constant presence establishes a harmonic link between the two, and they become one. While seeking the presence of the Supreme Soul, the bhakta, or true devotee, renounces all associations in his life, from the meanest to the best. Having purged his being of the worst and the best, along with everything else, he automatically wins the association of the Supreme Self, Param Atman. When the vile associations are cast off from the heart, the external depravities barely touch him. The devotee enjoying the presence of God is felt to be venerable by the common man, though the common man, through his ignorance, may hide it or not admit it. And if such a man is not liked by the people, we can be sure that that man is certainly not an associate of the Supreme Self. And if any bhakta were to take himself to be immersed in the divine presence, and yet to be criticized by others, he must deepen his conviction. For if a man has attained to the position of unstinted emancipation, he is rarely disliked by others, for the people themselves are his very self-luminous soul, though ignorant of the fact. An abidance in God, to be in oneness with the self, is the only way. In this world of immense variety, different beings of different types are suffering from different kinds of ailments, and yet they are not prepared to throw off their miserable physical frame. That is, even when wailing under physical and mental pain, no one can get rid of self-love. If this be so, then it is right to say that men would be so short-sighted as to avoid their saving grace, which is the saint. For it is only the pseudo-saints that the people get tired of. The needs of these so-called godly persons are ever on the increase, and the already depressed people simply cannot bear it. That is why they try to avoid them. And nobody can blame them for it. On the other hand, the saint, the true saint and sage, blessed by the vision of God, enjoys the bliss of the self, Atman. And it is inconceivable that he should hanker after worldly enjoyments and be a dead weight to society. For that overflowing reservoir of bliss, the beatific soul does and must confer only bliss on the people by his delightful and loving light. Even the atmosphere around him is enough to hearten these suffering souls, let alone the consoling word from his mouth. He is like the waters of lake that give nourishment to the plants and trees around the brinks and the grass and crop fields nearby. The saint also, wherever he may be, gives joy and sustaining energy to the men around him. The aspirant and the spiritual thought. The word aspirant refers to a true devotee who inquires and reflects on the spiritual life. Spiritual inquiry is the highest and the best. This seeking after the meaning of the highest is called the first half by the saints. A proper understanding of this results in the vision of God and eventually matures into realization of the true nature of the self in the second half. The rationale of the search for the spiritual life is to be prepared for eternal life. From the moment of the consciousness of I and not I, one is pulled by unwanted things and is whisked away from the one true desire, Atman. One expects so many things while destiny presents him with quite the opposite. The cup is taken to the lip, but there is the inevitable slip before the very first sip, and one has to accept it mutely. Some get tired of this worldly life and try to find a remedy for it. Victims of the misery, upon awakening, become aware of their primary cause of worldly misery, which is estrangement from the self. While the rest of humanity does not. This awareness of worldly harassment is the initial stage of spiritual aspiration. Only those that are awakened to the misery of life are the candidates eligible for authentic spiritual life. Those who get lost in the sense objects without turning their minds toward the self leave this world in utter agony. But the one who, tired of the wretched life, takes to the path of spirit, starts his life anew with contemplation and atonement. It is here that the stage of true salvation in the spiritual life begins. It is here, for the first time, that one gets some real joy, though not fully abiding or sustaining. At this preliminary stage, he gets the company of satsang and like-hearted devotees. Reading of the lives and works of the past incarnations of God, of sages and yogis and saints, the singing of the glories of the divine name, visiting temples, as well as a constant meditation, gives one a direct experience of the mystic life. His desires then fade as they are satisfied to a certain extent. Thinking that he has had the vision of God, he intensifies his efforts in the direction of fond remembrance of the name of God and of the Lord's worship. In this state of mind, the bhakta, the true devotee, has a glimpse of his cherished deity as a kind of divine vision and is satisfied with it. At this juncture, he is sure to come into contact with a real saint. The saint or guru makes it plain to him that what he has is not the real vision, which is beyond experience, and is to be had only through self-realization. At this point, the pious aspirant gets into the stage of the true meditator. In the beginning, the aspirant is instructed into the innermost being as the indwelling spirit. These are the meaning and the nature of prana, the life force, and the various plexuses or chakras and nadis. And finally, the nature and arousal of the kundalini and the nature of the self. Later on, he comes to know of the origin of the 5 elements, their activity and merits and defects. Meanwhile, his mind undergoes the process of purification and acquires composure. And this, the aspirant experiences through the deep, subtle center of the indwelling consciousness. This knowledge of consciousness transforms him into a pure, eternal, and spiritual form, who is now in a position to initiate others into the secrets of the Spirit. The stage of the aspirant or seeker ends here. As the great Saint Tukaram said, the aspirant must put in ceaseless efforts in the pursuit of spiritual life. Thoughts arising at every moment must be utilized for self-knowledge. Every moment he must be on the alert to take an account of what he is and how he is progressing in the direction of direct experience of the self. He must be watchful in ascertaining the nature of this I, which is involved in the affairs of pleasure and pain, and which arises out of the sense experience. We must know the significance of what it feels like to experience the self when the senses are not in operation. We must also know what the real difference is between a great soul and an ignorant worldly man. The ordinary mortals possess the same kind of body as does a great saint. Yet while great saints happen to be the savior of mankind, while the worldly minded are just insignificant creatures. We must know the rationale of this incongruity. Is the indwelling spirit in these 2 forms the same or different? We must know that the saint appears to be as much a product of the temporal process as we are. And still, there is that irreducible difference. Why? If both be the recipients of sense experiences, the reason of this great difference must be found out. The saint is a veritable ocean within, while the worldly ignorant man is steeped in insatiable greed. We must know the why of it all. The nature of the present embodied ego and the eternal self must be properly understood. The self, with its ego and material adjuncts, is a fleeting apparition. What is the nature of the eternal self, Atman? What is its habitat? All these queries must be answered. For what possible preparations can ever be made for its achievement unless one knows what it is that needs to be done? Under the instructions from the priests all over the world, religious men perform acts of charity and righteousness. But how and where precisely is the benefit reaped? What is our exact form then? What is the nature of the fruit that we enjoy as the premium of the acts of charity for the purification of the mind and realization of Atman? The form kept in mind at the time of performing the charitable deeds and the actual form must be ascertained. But there is no system in our routine material life, nor in spiritual activities. Hence, the aspirant should try to get to the deepest meaning for himself without dabbling into other people's affairs. One must think of the path and way to God day and night. The nature of the active principle must be ascertained, lest its activities be led astray. Those who waste their energies in useless pursuits, instead of harnessing them to the achievement of the highest truth, are sure to lose the game, while those who are engaged in the pursuit of the self must achieve oneness with God. They verily are that who have realized the self, and the rest are but slaves of the flesh. This is why one must turn to spiritual life. Spiritual life is so great, its nature is unfathomable. If a petty worldly man stands up and declares that he knows what spiritual life is, then we may take it that he is talking nonsense. For spiritual life is all in all. It is so great, so deep, so immense, that nothing can stand in comparison to it. Even the cosmic energy would pale into insignificance before it. Contemplation of spiritual life is great bliss. Those that try to understand it consciously with the help of the intellect are lost to it. Rare is the one who, having concentrated on the source of the cosmic energy, enjoys the bliss of spiritual contemplation. But there are scores of those who take themselves to be spiritually inspired and think themselves perfect beings. They expect the common herd to honor them and respect every word that they utter. The ignorant people, on their part, run towards these impostors for spiritual sustenance and do what they bid. In fact, the pseudo-saints are caught in an inescapable snare of greed and lust, and hence what the ignorant seeker gets in return is not the blessings of satisfaction, but the ashes of their own selfish interests thrust back onto them. The self-styled man of God, speaking ad nauseum about devotion to God and the Guru, and about spiritual matters, is full of lust and spiritual conceit. As regards a true saint, however, men look for a chance to serve more and more. But as the saint is ever contented, composed, and smiling, steeped in beauty, desiring nothing, seekers are left to serve in their own way, which they do with enthusiasm, and they never feel pressured to do so. True greatness and real saints are always humble, loving, silent, and satisfied. Happiness, tolerance, forbearance, composure, and other qualities must be known by everyone. Just as one experiences one's bodily states such as thirst and hunger, drowsiness and pain, one must with an equal ease experience in oneself the characteristics connoted by the word saint. As we know for certain that we need no more sleep, no more food at a given moment, so also we can be sure of the above characteristics from direct experience, and they never need verification. One can then recognize this immense presence in others with the same ease. This is the test and experience of a true spiritual leader.